Hello, everyone, and thank you, Peter, for inviting me along today. And thank you, Peter, for giving me the good grace of giving me the option to actually define what I'm going to talk about. It's not often one gets this opportunity. And shortly after I came up with this topic, which was real risk management drive AI adoption, I had something of an intellectual panic attack as I sent this topic over to Peter, because I realized that's actually quite a challenging topic to answer. And I hurriedly rushed over to my notes and my books, and I found some comfort in Gert Gigerenz's work, where he highlights in some of his books some of these quotes. "Radios have no future," Lord Kelvin, President, Royal Society of Arts. "Rail travel at high speed is not possible because passengers will be unable to breathe and would die of asphyxia," Dr. Lardner of UCL professor. So if great people of the past can't get the future right, then a not so great person like my good self am probably assured to also equally get the future wrong. So with these comforting thoughts and statements, let's very briefly look at my terms of reference. What am I meaning by artificial intelligence? I'm talking about narrow task-driven, not general intelligence. What do I mean by risk management? I mean the ability to identify, assess, and control threats. And within risk, we have these 5 themes. So if, for example, I was in a financial center and I spoke about risk, everyone would think I was talking about financial risk. We have legal, reputation, finance, strategic, and operational risk. The focus for me and my background is on operational risk, physical operational risk. The organization I'm with handles organizations' interruptions in business. And that could mean something from a power outage or water supply problem to a terrorist attack. So that is my background. I'm in operations. And with that being said, let's then turn to this question: will risk management drive AI adoption? And I am afraid I'm going to be fantastically orthodox and take a path well trodden here. And I am going to say that the best way to answer this question is to define first, what is it that people want? What are the things that motivate humans? Because in the future, there's going to be hopefully still lots of us humans around, and our motivations are going to drive where technology follows. So the question then is, what are the things that drive us humans? And for that, I bring to us BJ Fogg, who, when I was studying behavioral economics some years ago, the Stanford professor, BJ Fogg, outlined for us these 6 items, these 6 factors which drive us humans. So we run away from fear, isolation, and pain. We run toward hope, social, and pleasure. So these 6 motivating factors are realistically the universal factors that drive humans. Question then is, out of these 6, which has prominence? And if we're to follow the likes of Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, and Daniel Kahneman, we would decide that fear is the greatest driver of humans. This is the greatest motivator of us. But it's also equally important to point out fear is not risk. Risk management is about using probabilities to try and work out the likelihood of events happening, whereas fear is a disposition of us humans. It is an emotion and it's a feeling, whereas risk is logic and it is rationality. So fear is not risk and it is not risk management. Having said that, when it comes to certain things in risk management, we are often driven by decision makers that are driven by fear. For example, the amount of investment that goes into counter-terrorist measures in developed cities like the one I'm in here in London is entirely disproportionate to the actual risk and likelihood of that happening. So even though risk management tries to be very logical, methodical, and mathematical, the reality is fear is very often the driver behind decisions. So let's then assume that fear is going to be the biggest driver for us. What is AI likely to look like in the future? And for this, we have the help of Daniel Meisler, who wrote an essay recently called The Predictable Path of AI. And the image you see in the center here is one of his images that he generated. And it shows a young person stood in the middle of a high street. And this person in the next 3 to 5 years could be hyper connected. That doesn't mean that they just have a mobile phone in their pockets. It means that they're going to have digital assistants on their bodies. These digital assistants will communicate and correspond with all of the other devices and packages in the immediate environment. It will then tell the individual things such as there's been a lot of crime in this area, or perhaps the local mall incident data, make all of that available. Equally, it will correspond and communicate with all the CCTV cameras. It will know the personal disposition, risk disposition, and appetite of this individual. And it will say to the individual, hey, Joe, let's pretend the person's name is Joe. Joe, I don't like the look of this street right now. I've got an alternative route for you. It will only take 2 more minutes. Just bang a right here, and that's a far safer route to take. So this is one vision of how AI is going to be driven by fear and going to be therefore universally adopted. Daniel's prediction is based on 2 factors which need to be established for this to be a reality. Number 1, data needs to be available. The business case for data availability is going to be so compelling that we will waive our rights to data privacy. And secondly, the availability of the information around us will be made through APIs, which artificial intelligence will be able to generate. In other words, AI will get so good at writing APIs, it will be able to correspond and communicate with everything else in our environment in real time. And if we think about it, some of the future which is being predicted here is already here. So these are 3 items which could be described as digital assistants. They're available now on pre-order or for purchase. The limitless pendant, the Rabbit R1 and the Humane pin. The Rabbit R1 in the center there uses a large action model to be able to perform complex tasks on our behalf. And this is moving us away from a mobile phone. These devices would, in general, record everything that's going on. In other words, they record our voice and they record lots and lots of images and video. So we've got digital assistants already been made available. And just as an aside, I call this the mediation of man. This is not exclusively for men. This is going to be the mediation of everybody. But mediation of women or mediation of humankind doesn't quite sound the same. Hence the title, Mediation of Man. And if we look then at another sector where we see risk, that is in cars and travel, of course, there's a huge number of people injured and killed each year by road traffic accidents. And the safety lobby for autonomous cars, that voice is very loud and very strong. And I suspect that the greatest reason for the adoption of autonomous cars and for them being legislated for will be how safe they will make our streets and our roads. And the likes of Matt Crawford, that we see there in the top left-hand corner, the American philosopher, he has a counter-argument to autonomous cars. He suggests that autonomous cars will do away with part of what makes us human. Part of what makes us human is our wish to acquire skills. And he suggests that in actual fact, our ability to acquire the skill to drive a car is part of what makes us human. I personally have no doubt that the safety lobby's voice will be louder and will quash the voices of people like Matt Crawford. So, with all this being said then, what do I think about the likelihood of this path of AI, fear and risk management? I have 2 fundamental reflections. The first of which is this: I don't believe that we as humans actually want this level of control. The thought that a digital assistant mediates pretty much everything in our environment for us extinguishes and eliminates altogether uncertainty. And uncertainty actually is something that we want in our lives. We invite into our lives a high level of jeopardy. Every time we drive a car, we have that jeopardy. Every time we choose to drive too fast, every time that we play in a sport and could image or damage our bodies, it gives us a thrill that makes us feel human. So I'm not convinced that fear is going to be such a powerful primary driver. Secondly, of course, there are things which, like biases in this world. So we have a chap here in the future underneath a streetlight. Things like the streetlight effect and the collapse of knowledge, the idea that we only search for things that are easy to find, means that we obviously have a very narrow thought pattern. These things are obviously inherently problematic with having so much AI mediating our life. But I'm also concerned around what the business model would be for things like digital assistants. My concern would be if they follow the social media package business model, that would mean that our digital assistants would be sponsored to guide us to go into local cafes, etc., etc. So that would be my concern around this as a pathway. And let's then look now at let's have a look at the notes. Right, let's have a look at today. We'll just look there at the future. Let's look at today and in some ways the past, because we represent an organisation that's working with lots of brands around the world in risk management, putting in place AI. So we're based in London. We're a niche team of data scientists, computer and research scientists. And we have seen since obviously ChatGPT a huge amount of excitement around AI. We would never mention before the use of AI in our products. However, since ChatGPT came along, it's become pretty much mandatory. There's been a huge outflow of money from other budgets, and budgets that have AI involved in them tend to get sponsored a lot more quickly, which is just an interesting observation in the real world. When we approach organizations, we use these three words to help them appreciate and understand what AI can do for them. And the further up the scale we go from 1 to 3, the more difficult the things are to achieve. So, for example, these 3 promises of AI, the ability to describe, we are able to identify threats and risks in the vicinity of an organization's assets, tell them what's happening, where it's happening, and at what time. Then we try and predict the likelihood of it happening again or how long it might last for. And then we have the touchstone, which is prescribe. This is answering the so what. So this is happening. There is a threat in the vicinity. We predict it will happen for the next X period. Therefore, you should do X or you should do Y. However, there are challenges when we try and apply AI in the real world. So this is a real use case from an innovation we worked on recently. We are working on a workforce deployment project, a large space of urban land, and the client in case had a lot of people being deployed. The question was, could we make better decisions through AI than the humans about where people should be sent to? And whenever we go into an organization, the likelihood is the primary data set we will get is incident data. That can be anything from antisocial behavior through to very violent behavior and possibly murder and death. These kind of primary data packages are terrific, but they have inherently within them survivor bias. Survivor bias, for those of you that are aware, is well articulated by the example of World War II bomber planes that came back from successful missions. These planes were considered successful because they returned from their mission. And as you can see, there's lots of red dots on this particular plane. These red dots represent where bullet holes have penetrated the skin of the aircraft. And in response, the engineer's initial response was to put plates wherever there were bullet holes. But of course, this isn't the right thing necessarily to do, because the bullet holes that went into areas where there are not red dots probably took down the planes that crashed and burned. So this survivor bias is also reflected in a lot of incident data that we work with. You have a large space of land and you put people in certain places, they report certain incidents, and therefore you put more resource in that space. That is not to say incidents are not happening elsewhere. There Therefore, we try and counter things like survivor bias by saying, can we have access to X, Y, and Z data sets? And of course, that often is data sets which are held elsewhere within the business, and that's far more painful to get a hold of. And it makes projects like this very often negligible or non-viable as soon as we try to reach out to get other data sets within organizations, because organizations are holding tight a lot of their data. So to the conclusion. My conclusion is that a lot of people are very worried about the future of AI and its pathway, and I can understand why, and there's good cause for that. Those of you that are interested in whether or not you have a future of work, I believe that if you are motivated and you truly genuinely understand the needs of an organization, you will still have a place in the future. I also believe that we fascinate a little bit too much about the innovation, and in actual fact what we should be looking at is the diffusion curve. So it's not the innovation that's so important, it is more the capacity of that innovation to spread and penetrate society. So we probably should reshape the discussion much more around where technology is going as far as users, rather than actually the next latest greatest thing. Having said that, many of you will recall during the years 2020 and 2021, your government probably said something like our government here in the UK said, which is, we are bringing out a mobile app. And the mobile app will use Bluetooth to be able to communicate with other devices in the area. And if someone has COVID, we will be able to track and trace them. This was a monumental failure here in the UK and cost an absolute fortune to not roll out. However, in these kind of times of crisis where fear is the priority, there is a very good chance that something like the Rabbit R1 digital assistant could counter the next wave of COVID, let's call it COVID-30. And if something like another pandemic occurred, I can see something like Daniel Meisler's path of predictable AI becoming a reality, and every person within society having a digital assistant. And the question would then be, would we surrender those digital assistants after the pandemic came and went? That is my conclusion. My name is Andrew Tollinton. You can reach me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I work for a company called SIRV. Thank you very much for your time.